All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Paramedics and Pints. With me today, we've got Wade, as always. We've got Mike. We've had Mike on before. If you haven't checked out that one, it's pretty good. You should go check it out. And we've got Casey with us today. Our man Casey, you want to talk a little bit about your background? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So been in the industry now for 17 years, I think. I was an EMT for 3, and then I've been a paramedic for 14 now. Yeah, I was at the 911 county for 11 or 12, something like that, and I've been doing flight for about 3. I don't know if those numbers actually add up, but
Listen, no,
ballpark.
I mean, who's going to verify it?
Right.
Like, close enough.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Medics aren't good with math. We know.
No,
That's not our strong suit.
Yeah, and then without being specific about like companies, where do you fly at?
I fly in Alaska.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So hopefully we'll get some cool nitty gritty.
Yeah.
I know that's a pretty specific thing.
What an amazing place to work, for sure.
I bet.
Yeah.
I
Jealous.
bet. Then what are we drinking today, boys? Wade, we'll start over with you.
Repeat offender Idaho Hazy IPA. It's pretty solid. Pretty solid every
You
time.
say that 10 times fast?
Oh, I would, but I don't want to eat up air.
He hasn't drank enough of them yet.
Yeah.
I have a Mother Earth Tierra Madre. It's pretty good if you're from Nampa, Idaho.
I think you had a Mother Earth last time, right?
I'm a big fan of Mother Earth. Yeah, I had a California cream ale last time, which is in here somewhere.
Yeah. So Mother Earth, hit us up. Hit us up. How about you, Casey?
I unfortunately have given up the brewskis, so I'm sipping on a Jameson Black Barrel Reserve.
Nice.
Just has to be tougher than the rest of us.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I just can't handle beer like the rest of you. You guys are tougher than I am.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's because you're so small. You just can't handle it.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, which, like I was saying earlier, I'm glad I'm closer to the camera, so I don't look like a real child just sitting next to you. I've got Bulldog root beer, which I'm sure will be good. A little craft root beer. So to start it off, we're gonna spin the wheel. Sabrina, you can come in and put that in front of Casey. Casey's the new guest, so we can.
I saw that.
We can edit that out, right?
We could, will we? I don't think so.
I swear I've only had like 3 sips of
It's
it.
his second bottle.
All right, Sabrina, you're gonna have to tell us what it is because none of us can actually see it. Maybe
Yeah, I'm
Wade
totally
can.
blind. I have no idea what's on the board.
Backwards.
Combative patient.
Combative
Combative
patience.
patience.
All right. I feel like we've kind of
I've got
Mike,
a
you
flight
talked about
specific
that
one.
a bit. Oh, flights, nice.
Yeah, but
Yeah, you want to just jump into it?
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think combative patients in the air are obviously very different than combative patients on the ground. And we've talked, I think we had our other episode, we talked a bit about combative patients overall. But yeah, I had one specifically where I gave the most narcotics I've ever given a patient in my entire career. I think we gave about 700 milligrams of ketamine, 10 milligrams of Versed.
If you
Boy
don't
dose.
know, those are both massive amounts of
Yeah,
medications.
massive.
Yeah, like 300 or 400 of fentanyl over the course of 2 hours for this guy. We should have intubated him, but this is like a learning moment for me. But yeah, it's one of those where you just, you get ready to throw someone in a helicopter, and the second they start twitching too much, you're like, all right, we got to do something about it. And it was a guy that we picked up for alcohol withdrawals, and he was combative at the facility we picked him up at. And we showed up and immediately gave him a bunch of meds, thinking, it's either we're going to sedate him and intubate this guy, or we're going to kind of let it ride after we give him this medication. So we gave him, a bunch of ketamine right off the bat. He was doing fine. We're like, all right, we don't need to intubate this guy. I think it'll be safe. We kept him restrained. And the second we loaded him into the helicopter and lifted off, it was just enough stimulus to wake him up. And he just starts pulling at the restraints. And, and then just down that rabbit hole for the next hour of just every time the guy moved, we're like, hit him again. And we would just have medication.
With medications, not.
Yeah. With medications. So
Whack
we
him
tried
again.
everything. We finally, we dropped him off at the hospital an hour and a half away with all those medications on board, and he was sleeping pretty sound.
I mean, you can't just like an ambulance. You just pull over. You can't really just pull over.
No,
a helicopter, fixed wing.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, with when it comes to flight, it's it's all about safety and if we can do it safely. And it was one of those afterwards we kind of reevaluated, like there was probably better ways to go about that, and we probably should have taken a little more time and probably intubated the guy for our own safety. But it was a learning moment. I've only had a couple combative patients in flight, but that was probably the most memorable one as far as just having to like hold somebody down and medicate him in the middle of nowhere in a helicopter. That was very interesting.
And it was an 1.5-hour flight. That was what you were saying?
It was about an hour and 15-minute flight, but by the time, you kind of lift off, fly, land, and whatnot, about an hour and a half.
Did it feel like a 4-hour flight?
It felt like a 4-hour flight. I mean, I think the whole time I kept looking up at the pilot, like, how far out, as we're just hitting the guy with medications over and over and over, and he just would not go down. I mean, he was a fighter.
Do you guys carry just a massive amount because you have such long transports?
We call it the baby. It's our bag of narcotics, and
we call ours the football.
The football, yeah. I mean, it's big. So I've worked for a few different places, including another flight agency where ours was this little tiny box of narcotics that would not have lasted for this, but we carry a huge bag and we still had plenty of medication left to give. So luckily we carry a lot of narcotics, a lot of medications, including everything to intubate and paralyze if it needs to go down that route. And we had very much discussed it. But yeah, we have a lot of medications that we can carry. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the things in the news as far as giving way too much of different medications. But so we're obviously very careful of how we do it and how we monitor. But we've got plenty of firepower.
Trained professional with fentanyl.
Yes, exactly. Fentanyl and ketamine, that's my favorite combo right now.
Yeah, I think that was the one that was in the news recently, was ketamine, right? Was that
Colorado
or something?
And there was another one where they gave rock uranium instead of...
thought they were giving ketamine. Accidentally gave rock.
Which...
Oh, no.
I don't know.
I feel like
turned into a big deal.
I feel like either way you should be treating the same.
Well,
overdose on either one.
Yeah, if you watch the videos or kind of read the articles, it's pretty awful. I mean, they just essentially walk up and don't really assess their patient at all. Give them medication.
And I absolutely hate to armchair quarterback these kinds of calls, right? Because we weren't there. But to some extent, you gotta, it really confuses me. Everybody is going to make, at one point or another, some kind of mistake, whether it was a poor assessment or a medication error or whatever. But it boils down to, what did you do afterwards? Did you do supportive care? Did you pay attention to your monitor? Did you pay attention to presenting signs and symptoms afterwards? It seems like a lot of these are so incredibly preventative if you just pay attention.
Absolutely. Or they didn't even have the most simple monitoring tools or even oxygen on some of these patients.
Right.
And you sit back and your blood boils watching them, because I think we're all in it to be patient advocates. And when you see somebody be so poorly treated, even if it's 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. or whatever, it's that's not the type of stuff we stand behind at all. And I think they are getting what they deserve, I guess, but it's that's no other really good way to say it. Yeah.
That's one thing I think I really love and respect about EMS in general is like we all hold each other to a standard that I don't think is always the case other places of if somebody screws up, we're going to call them out. And if you make that mistake, I don't want my name to be sullied by your poor care.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to stand up for you. You made the mistake, and you're going to have to deal with the punishments for it.
And on that note, too, you can kind of tell the people you like to work with, because, like Casey said, we all make mistakes. It happens to each and every one of us. But, I got called out. Now it's I'm going to own the mistake I just made instead of try to hide it, too, because that's only going to come back and bite you in the ass, every single time.
And maybe your patient, too.
Yeah, exactly, right? Patient advocacy and then holding yourself accountable, you're going to be just fine from a legal perspective if you take care of those two avenues,
Yeah.
And another perspective of that, too, is I really, when it's the appropriate time, I think ketamine is an absolutely amazing tool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
But because of incidents like this, it's just getting a bad name.
Yeah.
And
it's like fentanyl. We've all seen fentanyl get a bad name after all
Right.
these overdoses. But it's an amazing tool in the right setting.
And on that kind of topic as well of like holding each other accountable, I've talked a lot of shit about nurses in my career. And now I have to work with them every day.
Yeah.
But they are great at like upholding the standard, right? And they have a really strong culture of, they'll call you out for stuff and you might think it's not worthy of it sometimes, but they do a really good job of like holding each other and holding their partners really accountable for everything, and makes you show up to work, ready to work. And it's just a good culture that they have.
And also have the understanding you need to kind of have thick skin.
Absolutely.
No one's trying to make you feel bad. No one's trying to be an asshole to you. It's just, you got to be better.
You better leave your ego at the door. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Be coachable.
Yep. They're calling out the mistake. They're not calling out you personally.
Exactly.
Which is a mentality you have to have.
Yeah.
Until it gets personal.
Until it's like,
talk.
Speaking of combative patients, everybody hates Mike and Cody, who Mike used to work with all the time, until it's like Mike and Cody. And then the patients just hate you personally.
We brought in a lot of that to ourselves. We'd walk into a call like bickering and like talking shit. And I think patients would just kind of pick up on that, and it would start right as soon as we walked in the door. Yeah. I don't think Casey and I would have that same quiet vibe, because Casey's going to walk in there, they're going to be like, yes, sir.
I mean, to a degree, I hate to say that, but to a degree, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's to every psych or combative or whatever, there's some element, whether small or big, of behavioral and calculated thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Physical presence makes a difference.
Yeah.
Too,
Yes.
I feel like sometimes though it kind of backfires. Like
Sometimes it does,
I've heard
absolutely.
from guys like big scary looking dudes. There's one specifically that we all know that I know would have people like, there was like a challenge, right? Like they deal with it more than you would think, even though they're 6'4", big huge guys, because little man syndrome would come out in some combative patients. And they want to have to challenge the big guy to show their dominance.
And that's a very real thing too. And a lot of it is too how you present yourself, right? If you're a big dude and you come in chest all pumped out and hitting either side of the door jamb on your way through, that little man syndrome is probably a little bit more likely to bloom, if you will.
He's a
I can't
teddy bear.
I can't stop myself from hitting the doors as I walk through. Like, I try not to.
That is a heavy bird, my friend, and I sympathize.
Don't you hate that, Mike, when you hit the door jam on the way in?
Oh, yeah,
I hate
all
it
the
too.
time. Right.
That totally happens to me all the time,
Yeah.
Mike, I was going to ask you, like back to the combative patient questions. I didn't realize it at the time I was being interviewed, but after sitting on several interview panels afterwards, for flight specifically, they asked some very specific questions towards combative patients, looking for not necessarily a right answer, but maybe a right mindset.
Yeah.
Did you get that at all in your interviews?
I did not on my second agency. I think my first agency, there was something along, safety, because safety is like everything.
Paramount, yeah. I didn't know the safety culture until I started flying.
Exactly. Yeah, same. And I think they always ask something along the lines of safety. They just want to make sure you're not going to be that guy that's going to do something really dumb and throw a patient in an aircraft that's going to kick your pilot in the head while you're trying to fly, or or you're going to be unsafe with the patient themselves either. So I think they want people with that right mindset. They generally interview with other flight crews in those interviews and that kind of thing. So anybody that's looking to go into through that process, you're going to get your interview, but you're also going to have to meet the flight crews themselves, because they're not just hiring people that are really good at the job. They want to hire people for their personality and people that they want to be around.
How'd you get hired then?
I don't know. It was I put the wool over their eyes for a while, but that's a big part of the culture that I don't think a lot of us.
Yeah, a lot of it's mindset.
Yeah,
they want to see what your mindset is.
The expectation is you're very good at your job, but they want people that they want to hang out with for 24, 48, 96. 10 days.
240.
Yeah. So
like based on the last podcast episode you were on and telling us all the shit you would talk with patients, has that backed off a little bit since flight, or is that still a pretty reoccurring theme?
Absolutely. I am a customer service first and foremost, and that doesn't you make me sound like I would just walk in and start smack talking my patients. No, I absolutely not. Yeah, I am buttoned up and
that is a very interesting dynamic to try and get used to, where you're working for maybe a small local government county 911 system where there's for lack of a better term, no other options.
Yes.
You are the only one to call.
Yeah.
And then you start working for a private service, which most, not all, but most of these flight services are private, and you have competitors. And it is just a different dynamic to get used to.
Interesting.
You
So
have to-
customer service really is.
Yeah,
Customer
it really
service
is, yeah.
huge. I mean, you walk into these tiny little hospitals and they're truly doing their best with what they have, or you're walking into this
Absolute
scene
best of intentions.
where they can run 2 calls in a month or a couple in a year, and they're calling a helicopter in because their neighbor is having a heart attack, right? And so you may walk into this just shit show where they have done everything wrong or they have done nothing for this patient, and you have to be like, hey, that's okay. You're doing your best. You have to kind of keep a smile on your face. And even if you're sitting there like, oh my gosh, they did this, that's going to really, affect this patient's outcome. It is all about customer service and make sure that they're going to call you guys back, because they can call other companies for the most part. And you don't want that. They're going to talk about that experience they have with you, that flight paramedic or that flight nurse, forever,
Right.
because it's, it's not something that they do very often.
I saw an interesting article. So like rural medicine, right? Like doctors doing their best with what they've got. It was a guy who actually ended up having like a head bleed, and they used an IO to relieve the pressure in that. Have you seen, like, for you guys, obviously more so than Chris and I being more local agency stuff, have you guys seen any like outwardly just left field medicines like, well, I'm surprised that worked just from a rural setting because it's all they had? Have you any examples of that? Just out of curiosity.
I've heard of the IO in the head to relieve pressure is kind of a quick means of stabilization. Never done anything like that myself.
Right. As far as like rural medicine goes, like,
I mean, it's still medicine's medicine in the United States, right? There's still a standard, so it's not like they're doing.
Oh yeah, it's not Wild West stuff,
Yeah,
but
well, it is Wild West.
But
It is,
MacGyver
some of it's Wild
creativity.
West, and we'll just say outside of your standard protocols. I've seen it. So like I actually was not on this call, but we had one of my prior partners. He got to do an escharotomy because of a bad meth lab explosion. They had roughly a 4, maybe 5 hour flight, depending on headwinds. And he literally started to, get that frozen chest. Everything just started to get crispy, and movement was, hindered. And so, you don't have. Sometimes our sat phones work. Sometimes they don't. But almost every one of us has little GPS inReaches. And so, our medical directors are super cool, and they are very aware of the logistical challenges in Alaska. And so he sent an inReach text message to our medical control doc, just kind of a really brief, hey, this is what we got. This is what I think's happening. Can I do this?
yeah.
And the doc texts back, yep, be careful of this, this, and this. And there
Can
you go.
imagine one typo?
That's crazy though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense though, right?
Yeah.
Like that. What else is there?
Yeah.
I mean, if
Means
you
to an
do what
end.
you got to do.
To some degree.
Yeah, I think
There's-
that's the biggest probably difference that I'm sure Casey's learned. He's flown longer than I have. And speaking of, when I started on the ground, Casey was like one of those idols I looked up to when I started, by the way. So it's really cool to have him on here.
Poor decision
When
on your part.
I went to get into flight, he was like the first person I contacted about getting in. But I think the biggest challenge that you face going from the ground to flying is logistics.
Yeah,
it's the same
logistics.
job for the most part. I mean, there's obviously a lot of new medical stuff with the critical care aspect, but you're doing, your scene calls especially. It's the same calls you've run 1,000 times on the ground. You're just in a helicopter trying to figure out. I mean, my first scene call, I put the limb leads on backwards because it felt just so new.
Right.
And so it's just all the logistical challenges of like, okay, now I have this patient for 3 hours. Oh, our sat phone's not working, and I need to figure out, how to talk to my medical director. Or, you just have to problem solve for a long time and really anticipate not just what you're going to do now, but what are you going to do for the next 3 hours, and what are you going to do for that patient that's going to benefit them not only the next few hours but the next few days. So
In the
I think
long
that's the
run, yeah.
big. You're not just saving life; you're saving limb now. Is kind of what someone told me when I got into flight. So
How much like top down? How much of a discussion is this with your administration, and like of having to sometimes maybe blur those lines and live in the gray a little bit?
we have. Where I work, we have full backing from our medical director. If you can justify what you need to get done, you can, within reason, obviously, you can do it. So we have full backing from our admin. Most of them have flown in the past. They understand kind of what's going on. So we definitely have, and I'm sure Casey can attest to that, because I think a lot of the good agencies are the same way, that we have full backing as long as we can justify what needs to be done and we can do it the right way. Yeah.
And I would absolutely agree, and even add to that a little bit more. Our medical directors have been great and really involved, and to the point where they're so involved that they're learning who's who and who has what skill set and who they trust with what, right? As all of us experienced with our medical directors when we were coming up. And they go to great lengths. We do 4 separate tissue labs a year that all have chest tubes, and they even teach this escharotomy and fasciotomy type procedure. They're fully backing, very supportive, and they give us the tools.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So to say, because you guys have the critical care changes, right? Any skill in particular from just your ground medic to flight medic that you're like, oh, this is something that I wish we could have implemented earlier in your ground experience?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm actually a big advocate. I really thought, and this really isn't a new skill by any means, but I really thought I was dialed on vent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out if I'd had most of my patients who I intubated and vented for more than the 10 to 15 minutes, I probably would have killed them.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Like, I didn't know jack diddly about ventilating somebody and all the intricacies and nuances and whatnot. And it's just not something that's taught in your everyday paramedic program.
I was a classic. Let's throw them on the vent. This fucking thing's alarming. Let's take it off and bag them. Like,
Right.
That was me.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about the vent, and so that has been. I would totally agree that that's been the biggest.
How much of your training on the vent was getting your FPC? So, FPC is like the flight paramedic certification, right? How much of that was going through an FPC course, and how much is just you learning on the field, like in the field?
I did a lot on my own, and my agency supplied a lot as well. Like I probably read 4 or 5 like full textbooks on ventilator management, because it is that much of our job, and it's especially up to the medic to really know that ventilator. And I didn't come from a critical care background. I came from 911 only for years, so I took it upon myself to read a few different textbooks, but I also took like a 12-hour mechanical ventilation course through work, and then you get academy training and some through the FPC, but for the most part, the FPC is going to teach you like what a vent looks like, how to manage it a little bit, and kind of how to set it up on a really basic patient. Like,
I would say the FPC prep is just a similar version to a paramedic type scope, just kind of a watered down, slightly more advanced than your regular paramedic version. You might go through a couple specific modes and what they do, but as far as like actual vent theory, it's pretty lacking. And to Mike's point, like this is weird to think about, but if you're flying with a nurse, as I'm just talking here about how I didn't know shit about vents, ironically, the medics are still probably the person with the most vent experience.
Yep.
Because usually in hospitals, you got RTs. If there's not RTs, the doc is the one, calling out settings that the nurse can, minimally program in, but they're not really pulling the trigger on what modes and what theory to use, what path to go down. So as much as I didn't know, it was still a weird dynamic to be considered of my team, the most experienced. And that kind of added an additional like, oh yeah, shit, I got some work to do. I need to dial in here.
Yeah, that I need an adult mentality.
Yeah.
Doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So with you guys flying with nurses, like, is there a pretty standard division of labor and who's strong and who's weak where? Is it kind of depend on your partner? Or how does that kind of dynamic work?
I mean, I think it's been a fantastic balance of scope. ER nurses are great, and they absolutely know a lot of things that I don't know, and not at all to discredit them, but most of us as experienced paramedics could probably fumblefuck our way through an ER day, right? I find the greatest balance in that scope is a good, well-experienced medic and a good, well-experienced ICU nurse.
Yeah.
I go into the ICU for an in-facility transfer, and I am the new guy. That's not my comfort zone. We got 6 to 8 drips hanging, maybe a whatever pump. But that's their playfield. That's their comfort zone.
Yep.
Vice versa, we get onto a scene, they're ready to take orders. They don't know what to do. That seems to kind of be the push and pull, and it seems to make for a very good balanced partnership.
I could see that with pump management, because even with our limited pump usage,
Right.
we had the only 3 times I actually set it up was like, well, they got like this much of the medication because I'm 2 minutes from the hospital,
Right.
And so I could only imagine managing 3, 4, 5 different drips at the same time. That's a nightmare in my head. That's like a fever dream nightmare.
Yeah, and I think as the medics, as you do this for a while, like you can kind of learn. We walk into an ER in a facility transfer, and I feel like the medic can do the nurse's job, the nurse can do the medic job, right? That's kind of the
Yeah,
that's
the goal.
the expectation,
Yeah.
right? I can run the pumps just as well as they can run like the basic vent stuff, but it's like we get into an ICU, they're on a balloon pump or they're on all sorts of medications I've never heard of, and we have to decide. Okay, they're on 12 pumps. We can only carry 6 pumps. So what are we going to push? What are we going to infuse? And that's where that ICU brain has to come into play, because I'm sitting there like, adult, please, But then we get on a scene where it's like we're landing on some highway and have to make decisions like that, and figure out all this information. We're trying to figure out what to do with very little or chaotic information. That's where the paramedic's strength comes in, and where the ICU nurse is like, well, what are their labs? Let's see all their chest X-rays. They're used to having so much info. So I think that's it's a really good marriage, really.
It's kind of a fun balance between, initiating stabilization, on the medic's part, and being able to maintain stabilization on the nurse's part. It's kind of a cool balance.
Kind of like just what happens in the hospital. The ER comes in and stabilizes, and they move them up to the ICU, and the ICU keeps it going.
Yeah, I think if a nurse is doing it for a while, they're going to be well-rounded. Same with the paramedic. Like eventually everybody kind of learns the other's job and the expectations. You can really do either person's job.
Yeah.
When
I remember one of my first, I'm sorry, Wade. I remember one of my first legit critical ICU patients we walked into, and there was 6 drips hanging. And the nurse at the time, I was still relatively new in flight, so he was my FTO or preceptor or whatever you want to call it. So he wants to see, how I do in this kind of a deal. So I'm over there and I'm like looking at this one and I'm looking at this one and blah, blah, blah. And I start to get everything tangled and I start to get flustered. I am like totally a brand new medic again, not knowing what the hell I'm doing. And my preceptor's like, why don't you start with labeling each line? I'm like, fuck, that's a great idea. How do I label them? And he's like, take a piece of tape, wrap it around, write on it. I'm like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. How did you learn all these amazing things?
Simple tasks become
It's
like
just simple
so
shit,
hard
yeah.
when you're so out of your element. Yeah, we've been medics for 5-8 years, and we start flying, and you're brand new again because you're just in such
Especially
a
in those
different
environments.
environment.
You have so many lines, you got to label them. I'm having a bad day. Not happy to be here
thanks.
anymore.
Yeah.
Help. I need an adult.
So Casey, I'm curious, especially with you flying up in Alaska. It's pretty remote. I know you have the ability sometimes that you would have to go do some pretty wild stuff. Like I remember you talking about maybe sled dog teams or sometimes an option, or float planes. You have any cool stories?
Tell me something crazy.
Oh, man.
Any cool Alaska specific stuff that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, where do I start? There's, I'll start with this. I have not gotten to ride a dog sled yet. I've had a few partners that have gotten to ride dog sleds. So basically how it works in Alaska, right? It's so vast that rarely is your traditional EMS helicopter used, right? Almost everybody is going from little teeny tiny village down to Fairbanks or down to Anchorage or even down to Seattle, right? Just too far for an A-Star or a Forest, whatever, to go. So every little village up there has its own little runway, right? That's how they get supplies and whatnot. So we'll take our fixed wing 95% of the time. We'll land as close as we can. And then depending on where the patient is, depending on how stable they are, you might have to find a way to get to that patient. And so sometimes, again, I have not done this, but for a few of my friends and prior partners up there, they've gotten to ride dog sleds. I've done 4-wheelers, done snowmobiles.
Are you guys just pulling whatever the village has?
Yeah,
Or-
most of them have like, and there's, I don't want to make it sound too remote. A lot of the little villages up there do have vehicles, and some of them even have their own ambulances. But there's a few, they don't have traditional road systems. They have 4-wheeler track or snowmobile road systems. So yeah, we get as close as we can, and then we take whatever means. Sometimes you're hauling a patient in the back of a pickup truck. Sometimes it's an ambulance if it's working. If it's -50 up on the north slope, that ambulance probably isn't going to start.
Right.
And so, yeah, you kind of, as Mike was saying earlier, it's all about logistics. It's just a bigger sense of logistics that you need to figure this puzzle out and put it together and get your patient where they need to go.
How much of that is dependent on like the pilot? Do they have any say in those kind of things, or is that generally just kind of on you guys?
So the pilot's main duty, and Mike can either agree or disagree, I'm betting it's probably pretty much the same. The pilot's main responsibility is just to make sure it's safe wherever they're landing.
Okay.
And
I'd
I guess
agree.
wherever they're taking off
Safe,
from.
yeah, wherever you're getting in and getting out of. Yeah.
The way our dispatch process works is the pilot will get the first notification, and it's the weight and where they're going to go pick up from and where they're going to go drop off at. They don't get any kind of patient information, no demographics, nothing except the weight. And they'll come back to dispatch saying, yes, it's either safe to fly or it's not safe to fly. If we get the okay, it's safe to fly, then the med team gets the patient information, and to a lesser degree, but still significant, we also have the ability to, based on patient information, we have the ability to turn that flight down too if we don't think it's safe.
Agreed.
Do they not get that patient information? I've heard this is a thing, just
Yeah.
so it doesn't color their decision making,
Right.
essentially.
Absolutely, yeah, because you don't want, we get that text that it's a 2-month-old that needs to, it's going up to the children's specialty center, right?
Yeah.
And the weather's iffy. They don't want the pilot to have any sort of push. Sometimes they can still figure it out because they're like, you're going
Most
to
time they know
Seattle
by the
Children's.
weight.
You're like, okay.
Or the
we know-
weight
we
that
got
they
the
get,
weight,
yeah.
I mean, for little kids, does mom usually come along, or how does that work? on that?
Generally.
So you'd get
Depends on the helicopter is, hit or miss,
Yeah.
but generally they'll come along
Yeah.
with. Yeah. So, yeah.
There was one, it's not really a remote story, kind of. I call this my dick and hand epiphany. It's actually a good story.
Trademark.
But we were on a flight. We had picked the patient up in, the English name for this place is Barrow, big oil fields. The village name for it is Utqiagvik. It's the very tippy top of Alaska. Highest civilized area in the U.S. But picked him up, intubated, sedated, and I was just in a spicy mood. I was just salty. It was one of those, we had just gotten some news that the company was restructuring in a pretty decent way. And I was base manager at the time, and so I was dealing with just a lot of just the bullshit that you deal with, like so-and-so is using my pillow, or so-and-so ate some of my bread, stupid shit like that. They don't really have patience for. So I was kind of salty. Plus, this flight, we were in our prop plane, so it's roughly a 4-hour flight in a very loud, is vibracious a word?
Vibrations. I like it.
Vibrating.
We can make it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like it.
Vibrating plane. And I mean, it's a long flight, right? And especially if you got a sick patient, it's just not that much fun. So I'm salty, and this guy is intubated, and we have the ability to do labs, like iStat labs. So we pull some labs, and his kidney distress labs, his BUN and his creatinine, a couple other ones are just spiked. They're through the roof.
Those are things.
Those are things. Yeah,
I've
those are
heard
words, right?
before. Yeah.
His kidneys are hurting,
This
right?
is what separates
Yeah.
flight medics from ground medics. I think probably one of the big things. Is,
just kidney
lab
bags
values
will
will
I
vary.
never, and to the point of this story, never really thought I would give so many shits about urine output. But I do. Turns out it's an important thing. But anyway, yeah, kidney labs are jacked. And so consult with my nurse partner who, you know, is quite good and quite experienced with Foley's. And I'm
Not
like,
me.
what do you think, nurse partner? Hey, I'm just a little lowly paramedic. That's out of my scope. And he's like, that's fucking funny, dude. Get back there. I eventually convinced him to go rock, paper, scissors for it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I still lose.
That's fair.
Yeah, right. Still lose. So I'm back there and I'm getting sterile and I'm getting everything set up. And thankfully he's not, you know, huge. Getting everything set up, and I got his dick in one hand and I got the garden hose in the other, right? And again, I'm just fucking salty because everything that I mentioned before, and now I got to put in a fucking Foley catheter. So I'm angry. And suddenly I look out. This was in last February, so it's dark 24 hours a day up there, right? I look out of the window right before I'm starting to ram this thing home, and I see just this most amazing display of northern lights. And I have this epiphany as I'm, you know, holding. I'm like, you know what? I could be doing this bedside in some stupid hospital. I could be doing this flying over some stupid city. I get to do this in Alaska. This is pretty freaking cool. And then I went on, you know, with my duties. And
Sometimes I love my job.
Literal dick in hand. I didn't see that coming, but there we are.
Yeah, I feel like I think I remember you talking to you kind of when you were making that decision of whether you should go, and that was, I think you told me a story that you were kind of on the fence and you were doing like some ride-alongs, and then you were flying one day and you looked out and you saw the northern lights and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna do this.
this is it. Yep.
Yeah. Man, that's
super cool.
I know that's such a bucket list thing for me, and like for you, that's just like, oh, just, you know, as I'm doing whatever, there's northern lights.
He's
No big
casually
deal.
holding someone
Yeah,
else's
just
dick
hold
because he's like, oh, those are pretty cool.
Those are some good ones.
Yeah, people will spend $20,000 go to Iceland to hope
Yeah.
they get to see him, and it's just like, oh, it's Sunday.
And it's
Taking pictures of the night sky down here, just hoping to God it shows up.
And I do genuinely feel bad. You know, everybody asks me, did you see any good lights this trip? And I'll go like, nah, they were all right. And I genuinely feel bad at their response to that. Like, you mean they're not all amazing? Like, how could you think this? Yeah, I do genuinely feel bad. There's the things that we get used to, right? It's it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
yeah, if you get to see him that often,
Yeah.
you know, it's gonna be just like if you drink beer all the time. Maybe some beers are just okay. So how about your
That's
guys?
right.
How about
That's a
your
good
guys'
point.
beers? What are you
Good.
What are you thinking of what you're drinking today?
It's hitting home. It's
Yeah.
hitting Idaho.
It's hitting Idaho.
If you will,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is definitely one of my favorites, so always enjoy it for sure.
So what's different about that from the last ones? What's kind of that?
I feel like I could have 10 of these. As the other one, I can only have 2 or 3.
The other ones
just
are smooth.
yeah,
comparatively.
it's the Cali creaming. Is that what
Yeah.
the other ones were?
The other ones are pretty sweet.
That is
This
a
is
that
like
is a sweet one, yeah.
Yeah, just like a hot summer day. I can have a few of these.
Refreshing.
Yeah.
So we can pretend as it's like 22 degrees outside.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
January.
it's like
Summer day.
freezing cold outside right now. I'm going to be in my little parka and like Tierra Madre. Yeah.
There you go. How about you, Casey?
I mean, you guys know me. I'm Irish through and through. The palate is warmed up and it's going down super easy. This particular brand is one of my favorites.
Cool.
Do you have a favorite overall? Like, what's your favorite whiskey if you had to give an answer?
I feel like I'm gonna out myself on my lack of knowledge on actual whiskey here, but
It's okay.
You
For your
fly up in
reference-
Alaska and see the northern lights. It's okay if you're whiskey
Yeah.
knowledge is not great.
It's all right.
I do really, really enjoy the Redbreasts. Another Irish whiskey. Obviously, the longer it's aged, usually the better it is. But yeah, the Redbreasts are really good. But
Never tried
really,
that
any kind of Jameson is kind of my go-to. I brought back some ones that you can only. I went to Ireland, to Dublin, to the distillery. I brought back a couple bottles that you can only buy in Dublin, and those are also quite delightful.
Do you have that hard time of like, I want to save this, but I also want this?
Yes.
So you just kind of look at it all the time?
The wife is actually, so that's where me and the wife got engaged. And so the wife has actually put rules on those specific bottles where it has to be some special occasion and she has to drink it with me. I am 99.9% sure she does not like them. but for her, it's the emotional piece, right?
That's fair. So you're asking, like, is today the day?
Yeah,
Or
Sometimes I have to talk her into it.
Yeah.
It is a special occasion.
the art of persuasion, if you will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You just got to make special occasions sometimes. There you go.
exactly.
It's Wednesday. Here we are.
It's Wednesday, and it's 477 days since we got engaged, you know?
Yeah, it's a nice even number.
How about you, Mike? Any like real cool, interesting kind of flight specific stories you can think of?
Well, nothing compared to the Northern Lights. I like to tend to think we get to fly into some really cool areas. One of the more interesting ones that I did was more of just like a straight medical case for me, which was like a really meaningful one. We got dispatched to this little hospital for a post-cardiac arrest 10-year-old. We showed up right after EMS had dropped off the patient. And like any flight in the area that I work, all of our flights are long. I don't work in an area that's close to any real big cities at all. So every flight's at least an hour, hour and a half via rotor, helicopter. So we knew we had a long flight ahead of us. The kid was super sick. I mean, blood pressure's in the 50s still, intubated, couldn't sedate because the blood pressure was so awful. And if you know anything about labs, pH was 6.7.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Postcode, had been sick recently. They had just gotten pulses back before we got there. And so we showed up. Not much had been done yet, so it was just up to us to kind of show up. And, that's kind of why a lot of places call flight teams, is for the aggressive protocols and kind of what we carry. And so we were able to show up and... you started off with, one vasopressor going to 3 vasopressors, going to, multiple infusions and medications, and trying to see if we could manage the ventilator to kind of optimize this kid. And I was working with a pretty new nurse at the time, and this is kind of where nurse versus medic, she was like, all right, I think we can do this and this here. And I'm like, listen, there's nothing we're going to do right here. We need to get going to the specialty center. And, anyways, this whole time I was just thinking this kid was not getting better. We were trying everything we could, getting really aggressive with our medications. She was on norepinephrine infusion, epinephrine, push dose epi, pushes, vasopressin, like all the things. We were giving her everything, and we just got super aggressive with it and just watched her start to turn around. Blood pressures came back. She had gone from completely out of it to like her eyes were starting to kind of open by the time we got to the hospital. And we got her out of the helicopter, and the nurse at the receiving facility was like, hey, are you comfortable? And she gave like a thumbs up. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
That's
Like
pretty
chills,
cool.
dude. That's so cool.
yeah.
That's pretty
And
cool.
So cool.
called back like a week later. She made a full recovery, no neurological deficits.
Good
so it was
work.
that was cool.
Yeah.
Was the code because of whatever you were talking about pH? So she was obviously like sick. Was it before that caused the code?
Yeah. So I think what had happened, she'd been sick for like 4 days, and healthy kid, never had any had medical problems, and had been just so sick to the point of just like altered level of consciousness, that kind of thing. Parents went to check on her in the morning. She had slept with the window open, found her dead, called EMS. And I think that's part of what kind of saved her. She was super hypothermic when she got brought into the ER. And so, yeah, they found her. EMS started compressions, transported her to the hospital, and that's kind of when we got called. So not really sure exactly whatever ended up happening, but yeah, it was probably my most memorable case to see from beginning to end. That was
Have
really
you
cool.
guys noticed, so based on that story, have you noticed kind of an appreciation for where you were on ground? Oh, this is a good ground unit. So it sounds like EMS did a great job. Ground EMS did a good job getting the patient ready for you. Does that, in reflection, does that make you this is cool. I'm glad for the effort I had prior. Does that ever reflection
absolutely.
wise?
Yes.
Yeah, it makes me super thankful of where I came from and the system I worked in. Yeah. And I knew I worked in a good system when I was there, but you leave and you see other systems, you're like, yeah, it makes you really appreciate what a good paramedic, a ground paramedic looks like, or a good EMT, because you'll see the spectrum for sure.
Very wide spectrum. I've actually got a good one, very, very along those same lines. We got dispatched to a little teeny tiny village in southeast Alaska. And it was for a patient that was supposed to get a pacemaker, but decided to go on a cruise.
Hey, priorities.
Choices. Yeah.
Look, I paid for this cruise. It's non-refundable.
Yeah.
If I die, I die.
That's right.
If he dies, he dies.
Well, and I mean, to that point, right, I think a lot of, especially the older generation, maybe they don't realize that getting a pacemaker is not necessarily
Optional?
death sentence anymore, right?
Yeah.
You can live a long time with a pacemaker now.
Yeah.
And my wife is actually she's a pacemaker rep, and it seems like everybody and their damn dogs is getting pacemakers. I mean, at 30 years old, there's people getting pacemakers. But anyway, so he started having syncopal events on the boat. Boat made port. The local EMS crew got him to the clinic there, and the clinic actually had a dock. And a lot of these, small local village docks, they're not necessarily like ED docks. They're probably family practice docs,
Right.
just doing rotations and stuff like that. But anyway, starts having more and more syncope. Get him to this clinic, and they find out he's in a 3rd degree. Heart rate very slow. And then they call us for a report, and we just hear chaos in the background, right? And this nurse is saying, he was in 3rd degree, and then he was in VTAC. Now he's coded. I think I saw SVT. And I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? And so we get there, and there's not really a quick response in flight.
Yeah.
Right? Not like we know as ground, right? Where we had 90 seconds to get wheels turning, and we were expected to be on scene inside of 10 minutes. That's not a thing in flight. Everything is
It's like painfully slow sometimes.
Painfully
Even when
slow.
you're moving quick, it's painfully slow.
and some of that is in service to safety, right? Which, as it should be. But so we get there finally, and we see what's going on. And this guy is in some kind of weird, like, the nurse wasn't lying. He would go from 3rd degree to SVT to VTAC to VFib. Then he'd do like this asystole type code, like a really true 6 sinus type patient. Cardiogenic shock, BMP was like 5,000 through the roof. And so they had elected to RSI him right before we got there, thinking we'd appreciate that because we could just load and go.
Yeah.
He codes right after they push the paralytic, so they actually don't get the tube in because they start working the code. And bless their hearts, they were doing great for the tools they had and the resources and the type of clinic they were really doing great. And best of intentions, they did awesome. But again, lack of tools and resources and whatnot, this guy was headed downhill pretty fast. So we get there, we get him in a 3rd degree with an actually decent pressure. And I'm like, all right, now it's time. We kind of did the resuscitation before intubation. Now it's time. Let's drop that tube, get his ABG. Everything's still all jacked up. And for the next 3 hours, we play this game of 3rd degree, SVT, VTAC, VFib, code. And I'm like, I'm out of thoughts. And I'm like, so at this point, I call my medical director. I'm like, Doc, I need something to keep him level because he keeps doing this on me. He's like, well, if he's got more bradycardic rhythms, give him epi. Give him a whiff of epi infusion. Because at that point, he had been doing really well off push dose epi. And he said, yeah, if he's more bradycardic, give him the epi infusion. If he's more tachycardic, give him the Levophed or the norepinephrine infusion. And I'm like, oh, at this point, that's a 50-50 chance, right? I'm like, man, he loves his push dose. He's doing really well with that. He comes back almost every time off one. And we were actually also kind of trying to follow your local protocols.
Yeah, that's a good.
We were trying to limit the amount of cardiac epi that we were given because we didn't want that, neurologic vascular clamp down. Like we wanted to actually give him a chance to walk out of the hospital later. So we were reserved on the cardiac dosing of epi, but we were given quite a bit of push dose. And it seemed to be doing well. So I'm like, screw it. He likes that. We're going to give the epi infusion. And he goes straight from the 3rd degree, which he'd been doing 3rd degree SVT, VTAC. He goes straight from the 3rd degree into VTAC. And we get a blood pressure of like 200 over 130. I'm like, that wasn't it. Discontinue that, start him on the Levofed, and also dialed in his pacer settings for on demand. Like whenever he would dip, that would start activating and pace him. And that Levofed kind of leveled him out just beautifully. After we got that dialed, he never coded again. But the point of all this, to Mike's story, was by the time we got him to this point, it was like 4 hours after we landed. Our pilot ran out of duty time. So I called the pilot up. Oh, man, finally, that was a lot of work, but we're ready to go. He's like, man, I am so sorry. I can't legally fly you. I don't have the duty time to get you to Anchorage. And so he had to fly back to our base.
So he's allowed to fly himself, just not with other people?
Yeah, there's different, I don't know what you call them, modes of flying that you can operate, that the pilot can operate under. Mm-hmm. So he could fly himself back, get our day pilot flew the plane back to us, then we loaded up. Mm-hmm. So we ended up being in this little clinic for like 8 hours, and that was my hefty dose of like ICU level nursing trial by fire.
Mm-hmm. It's exhausting.
It is super exhausting.
Yeah.
And the hospital, they're so amazing. They like brought us fresh salmon and food and
perks of Alaska.
Yeah. And they were so much help, but right from the get-go, they were very much like, this is not our ballpark, it's not our area. We'll do what you want, but you guys are in charge. And yeah, it was amazing. But anyway, he ended up walking out of the hospital about a month later with a pacemaker.
Mm-hmm. Did you ask him how the cruise was?
I should have. Yeah. His wife said it was lovely up until he started passing out.
I bet. Yeah.
You know, I remember a call that you and I had on the ground probably, 4 years before we both started flying. I think you were already leaving to go fly, where we learned about pacemakers and defibrillators and the fact that they are all the same thing anymore. We showed up on this call, and I think Casey and I both kind of think of ourselves as like we love the cardiac stuff. Casey's like the god of cardiac.
Yeah, he's good at it.
But
I'm an enthusiast.
He's an enthusiast.
Not an expert.
Yeah. But anyways, we go to this call. I don't remember the full details, but the guy's just having chest pain, sick, doesn't look very good at all, very unhealthy individual. And he's in some like super wide, nasty rhythm. And we're like, he said, I have a defibrillator. We're like, all right, are you sure it's not a pacemaker? And he's like, no, it's not a pacemaker. It's new. It's not a pacemaker. We're like, all right, sweet. We were both thinking the same thing. Like, oh man, this is cool. We're gonna like, I think he was like a dialysis patient or something like that. Like, all right, we're gonna give some real like high level meds. We're gonna give calcium. We're gonna narrow this complex up. We thought we were so cool. Gave these meds. Nothing happened.
Nothing.
We're like, all right, well, let's try it again.
Shit. Yeah.
Nothing. And I'm like, you're sure this isn't a pacemaker? He's like, it's not a pacemaker. We get him all the way to the hospital, and the doc goes, yeah, all defibrillators and pacemakers are one now. Like, that's just how it is. He's got a pacemaker. And it was just like this, we thought we were just this high-level team.
What they hit the settings to is what will make it defibrillate versus pace.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember after that call, because, again, my wife, she's a pacemaker rep. She's the one in all the implants, setting all the settings and algorithms and whatnot. That's another thing that I thought I was relatively dialed on. I didn't know shit about pacemakers.
It was just one of those moments, like, we don't know as much as we think we know when
Yeah.
it comes to a lot of this stuff.
And it's hard because, like, the old school pacemakers were really easy to pick out on an EKG.
It was.
Like, there was that big spike, and it just doesn't show. I don't know if it's just lower electricity that it uses now or what. It just doesn't really show up anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the guy's problem really was just his pacemaker was going off.
Pacemaker
that
was
was
going
really
off.
it. Nothing crazy, but we went to this, like, place of, we got to give
Felt
him all
so
sorts
smug.
So
We did.
smug.
We thought we were so cool.
And I remember even getting irritated. Like, this should be working.
Damn it. Yeah, there was definitely a moment like, what is going on? And it did not work. And we were humbled pretty much immediately by the doctor. Like, no, it's just a pacemaker, guys.
Since I've started flying, I've actually used my wife as med control on pacemaker patients.
How do you chart that?
Called experts.
Outsourcing.
Yeah, expert consulted.
I've seen with, like, I had a student who had a pacer, and it was in his armpit. So, like, the new location of it, it's crazy from just, like, top-down analysis on this patient of, like, because usually, you see on the chest, like, pacer, okay, probably cardiac, or at least potential for cardiac. But now not even be able to see them. That's
Yeah.
crazy. The advances they've made.
Medicine is, whatever they're coming up with these days, it's insane. Just the level of what they can do and like the breadth of the things that happen in a hospital. Like you can take the same patient from a scene to the hospital and do so much, but then you take that same patient to another hospital and your protocols and what you do for that patient is just like magnified and multiplied. It's
and even tools that we use, a lot of these, high specialties, they use the same tools for completely different things.
Mm-hmm.
I remember learning that they use adenosine as a microvessel dilator when they're doing angiograms and like caths and PCI and stuff. And I remember watching them like, he's not an SVT. Why are you pushing adenosine? I'm a medic and I know this. Doc.
idiot
Cardiologist. And I was blown away. Medicine's come so
Is it
far.
still the same push? Is it an aggressive push if they're going to do it for the micro?
It's an aggressive one. I'm probably going to get called out by a cardiologist here. But yeah, it is an aggressive one, but it's a tiny, tiny dose.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So for you guys as flight medics, I know there's some skill differences. Do you guys have any cool stories of doing like those high level flight only skills?
Before we get too far, can I have another beer, please? Sorry.
What are we doing here?
Give me another Idaho.
Idaho. Appreciate it. It was that good that he's already through
It
it.
just makes me feel at Idaho.
This is kind of a leading question because you maybe mentioned something about a 4x4 or something earlier.
Yeah,
So I'd love to hear
I've been
that
meaning
story.
to ask about that
Yeah.
this whole time.
And there's a couple good ones. It's I've gotten to push TN Case, which is the new TPA.
Okay.
That's fun and nerve-wracking all at the same time. It's, big risk, big reward kind of a deal. So that's been a fun one. One of the skills that you kind of get to upgrade to is chest tube. And I remember being slightly confused when I was kind of first starting to learn about chest tubes because they're not really an emergent procedure, right?
Like the amount of time it takes.
Your
to-
needle
Yeah.
decompression is your emergent procedure,
Yeah.
right? And this is like a stabilizing measure almost, right? And so it took me a second to wrap my brain around that. But yeah, we were up in, where was that? Venatai. Little teeny tiny village just north of Fairbanks. And we had this guy that got in a four-wheeler accident. And Mike's probably familiar with King Air. King Air, it's a dual prop plane. The aircraft itself is actually pretty decent size, but like your cabin, your fuselage is pretty tiny. And to do any procedure of real work, it's pretty freaking hard, especially if where you have to do it is on the cabin wall side, right? It just sucks to do these kind of procedures inside a cabin. So this guy, mid-40s, if I remember right, he got in an accident, rolled his four-wheeler, and he had some pretty gnarly paradoxical movement. He had a pretty obvious flail chest. Do all the things, do all the assessments, and I'm kind of leaning towards he's got the pneumo starting. He's not quite at that tension stage yet. However, one of the things you worry about a little bit more in flight is even a kind of a simple pneumo can turn into a tension pretty quick when you get up into the air.
Oh, yeah, pressures. Didn't think about that.
Boyle's Law.
Yeah, Boyle's a bastard.
Yeah, Boyle's a bastard. Henry and Charles, too. They all suck. But get there, and he's got the hypotension, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to needle him. Just let's see what comes out, right? Let's see if I get a burst of air. And sure as shit, we got the burst of air. So now I'm thinking, all right, so I know he had a pneumo. Whether he was tensioning at the time is debatable, but he's got the pneumo. I know this needle in his chest is not going to be sufficient for going up in the air. Kind of got to pull the trigger. My nurse partner, who was FTOing me at the time, he was on a different patient, much more stable, but we didn't know that at the time. So it's a little bit on my own, as far as I felt comfortable with the procedure, but as far as making the call, you always want to try and consult as a team as much as you can. But knowing that this is probably the path that we were headed down, I'm like, I really don't want to do this in the plane. I really don't want to do this at 20,000 feet. Probably need to do it now. There's no tables. There's no clinic. There's nothing. Like the only platform I have to get this guy on that's, up off the dirty ground is on his quad that he rolled over. Thankfully, it had rolled over on wheels down. So I put him on the back rack, pretty light, lifted him up, put him on the back rack.
I just imagine Casey in like a fur jacket lifting a person onto an ATV.
Pretty light. Feels like different definitions.
Like an 1827
Jeremiah
Explorer.
Johnson. Just
Dude, at that point in time, I had like mom strength. I could have lifted a bus off my children. But yeah, put him on the back of this, and I got a little bit of heat for it, but more like, the kind of heat like that Connor got for the field amputation, like the heat that your superiors are obligated to give you, a little bit.
Like there's a bit of a wink and like, good job, but next time.
But,
don't do that.
Let's think of another option, kind of a deal. But so I got that a little bit for it. But yeah, I put him on the back rack of the four-wheeler, and I'm sure anybody who's in the field has heard this before. There is no such thing as a sterile environment, right? There is as clean as you can get it, but there is no such thing as sterile. So I did my best to get absolutely everything clean. I put sterile drapes down over the rack. I put him on top of the sterile drapes and scrubbed the shit out of his chest. I did as much as you could possibly do to make it as clean as possible. And I went to town.
Was that your first chest tube that you had placed?
That was my first chest tube that I'd placed on a live patient.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good luck
It's
topping that, dude.
It's a violent procedure.
I believe it.
yeah.
You got to put some freaking muscle behind popping that chest pleura.
Is there any pre-incision at all, or is it?
Yeah, so you do it's surface level is not the right word, but through the dermis kind of, and then I haven't really researched this part of it. Maybe Mike has, but apparently it actually heals better. So you make that small incision with the scalpel, right? And then you go in with these big, huge Kelly clamps, big, huge forceps, and you actually like rip it apart. You spread it with the tips of these things. I would think that it would heal better with clean cuts, but apparently it heals better with
Well, if you think about it, the surface area of a clean cut versus jagged stuff.
True, good point. Yeah.
I guess that makes sense because even in like normal C-sections, like I'm sure you've watched them too. You see in those two little nurses on either side, and they just jump and rip.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me they tore them open. It's like, why? You've got a perfectly good scalpel right there. What are we doing? So that makes more sense actually.
Jump and rip.
Yeah, that's how I
that way.
saw these two. Like in my head, they were like 4 foot tall when I watched my first one, but they just jumped on each other like 1, 2, 3, and then they. I don't know. It was like repelling in my head.
Yeah.
It very much was not that, but that's what it felt like.
Have you done any chest tubes, Mike?
I am like the biggest white cloud when it comes to like the cool skills. Like I'll show up to shift and the crew will be like, "Oh, we just got to do double finger thoracostomies. We gave blood. It was a trauma code this and that, and or this crew did a surgical crike this last week here." And it's like everybody else around me is doing all the cool skills. I'm a black cloud when it comes to a lot of like the super sick kids and the super sick ventilator stuff and just having like very sick patients overall. But as far as the skills, I don't really have like I don't have the stories as far as doing. I've never had to do a chest tube. I've had the RSIs, but yeah, the chest tubes, the big boy skills, the big boy flight skills.
And I
haven't had to do them yet.
I think I actually specifically remember telling you this when you were, calling me thinking about getting into flight. And I told you one of the things that I'd certainly experienced myself and what my preceptor told me is when a medic gets into flight, it's about a 30% increase in knowledge, but about a 10 to 20% reduction in skills.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very cerebral. Like it's very much, for a while I had more intubations and RSIs or intubations than IVs in flight, right? You just don't do the same skills that you had on the ground. It's a lot of, you're showing up to this scene where they can't get a tube or they can't, all the easy stuff's done, right?
Yeah.
And so you show up and we're expected to do the hard stuff that's remaining. And so, and I just haven't looked out on like the chest tubes and that kind of thing. But yeah.
Or vice versa, where they do everything.
Or they do
already
everything.
for
That's
you.
probably actually more common. We show up and they're already intubated. They already have their IVs. And we're showing up to give blood and do whatever, kind of fits into that puzzle of what hasn't been done yet. And it's very much all the basic first 10 minutes are done, and now it's your patient for the next
ICU
hour to
mode,
2 hours.
essentially.
Yeah, maybe on the scenes not so much, but you're just there to, like we talked about earlier, they've kind of preserved the life. You're there to preserve the the quality of life.
Initiating stabilization and maintaining stabilization.
Yeah.
Which
And that doesn't
both
mean
can
we
be
don't do
super
it.
hard.
And in certain areas, you're going to get chest tubes every week and intubations and all this stuff. But the region I work in, which is good, they have very good paramedics on the ground in some of these areas, and so they get to steal all the skills from us.
To your guys' credit, the easy stuff felt kind of hard sometimes for me. I don't know about if you can relate, like, oh, the RSI, that's the easy stuff. It's like, oh, yeah, that totally wasn't worried the whole time about my patients.
I think it's the expectation that an RSI for us should be easy.
That's baseline.
I should say easy is not a good term, but it should be something that we're very capable of. We practice it a lot.
Maybe routine. Maybe not just routine.
Routine is a good word for it.
Yeah, and so it's something that's expected that we do it the right way, we do it well, and we are there to do it when others can't.
Yeah.
Only time I called a helicopter, I watched them RSI. I also watched a firefighter is like, I want to try it, and he missed so bad in front
God
of
bless
the
him.
flight crew, and it was like,
Bless
you're
their
making us
hearts.
all look so incompetent right now.
Cody, we love you, but we're
not-
talking about you.
I love you guys were talking about the customer service thing with flight crews. The one time I've gotten to load a helicopter before, which I think I talked about, was just like, I felt so cool. Getting to load a helicopter, like, yeah, I'm rad. And then we they flew the patient away, and we go and get in the seat. And one of the guys had snuck away at some point. I don't know if it was the pilot, and there was a little bag, like a lunch sack, like brown bag with candy inside of it, and like, thank you for calling whatever flight service. There was like full Reese's bars and stuff. I was like, this is amazing.
This is the thing, yeah.
This is the best call of my life. Everything was cool.
Everyone's dropping a helicopter on the freeway now. The bag
Little
of
did
candy.
they know they were just probably next in the rotation between the two that were in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's just what they do all the time.
Yeah.
But like, I felt really special. So
Glad you felt
You
special.
are special, buddy.
Appreciated.
You're one of my favorites.
Yeah, you guys might think it's really cool when we land on a scene, but really, I just feel like a raccoon getting out of a rat's nest with the patient when we show up to the hospital half the time. But yeah,
no, man, when you guys show like when you guys walk into the hospital, it's like that scene in like Monsters Inc. When all the monsters are walking in, right? I feel like time slows down, like cool music plays as the helmets are on.
My mouth
pushing
slowly
in,
opens
pushing
as
in
they
the
walk
patient.
by.
I don't know if we get to say
little kids like that. Hey, mister, that you're really cool.
I will say, so we do fly on a helicopter occasionally, right up there, and as cool as it is absolutely 100% cool. I am just not helicopter size.
Yeah.
Even when I do make weight, it still just sucks with my height to get in there and do stuff. It's really hard. So I don't really look forward to them anymore.
Just more yoga.
But I love the float planes.
Yeah.
Those are a freaking trip to go get patients in. They're so much fun.
Does your service have a float plane, or is that like you go to a village airstrip and they fly you on the float plane from there?
So same with our company we have one company owned rotor. If anybody else in the state from our company takes a rotor, we vend it or rent it from a company that we have a contract with. Same with the float plane.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It's so much fun.
So, I
You're
mean,
such an adult, Casey.
I'm assuming there's still like a dock or something. Like you land the float plane in the water. That's being a float plane. Do you like find a little dock, and how do you get the patient from the ground into the float plane?
Oh, it's interesting. So yeah, you go tie off the dock just like you would a boat, right? And those float planes, especially ones we take, they're really tall, super tall. I don't even know what you call them. The supports between the actual plane and the floats, they're really tall. And so it takes. There are some pretty specific body measurements that the pilot takes into account. If you're over those, sorry, like we can't get you. But it usually and this is one of the amazing things about Alaska too, but it usually takes for a float plane load 4 to 5 guys that are the taller you are, the easier it is and more helpful it is. But yeah, the float planes, they'll take out their front seat and their back seat, so it makes kind of this just little space on the ground. And you got the smallest person up in the cabin, and they're kind of pulling as the rest of the 4 or 5 guys is lifting and pushing, and
That's crazy.
it's kind of interesting. But to that point, the sense of community in Alaska is something I've never witnessed before. You go to a little village, and every person in the village is there. 40 or 50 people are out there to see this person off. Or sometimes we've had a few little tiny village runways where the lights go out, in the middle of winter. And it's pitch dark already for 24/7. So it's pitch black. Everybody in the community will go grab their 4-wheelers or their snowmobiles, and they'll line the runway so you can still land.
Cool.
The sense of community up there it's amazing. It's something I've never seen before.
And I bet with how small they are, like
Yeah.
they have to survive.
Right.
It's a team sport.
100%.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think we went over a little bit over our normal time, so probably wrap it up here. Yeah, it was super cool. Super interesting just to hear that different perspective, especially like there's not a lot of dudes that do what you do.
It's
what
fun.
do
I'm very
either
lucky.
you guys do, but you
That's true. Yeah.
well, yeah,
Not in Alaska.
well, either you guys do, but I feel like you're just that one step up just based off the remote.
Just the environment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
which is really cool.
Yeah.
So
Well, anytime you guys want to
Casey's
come,
my hero.
anytime you guys want to come fly in Alaska,
Oh yeah, I'm holding you to it. 'cause I wanna
I'm
go.
dead serious.
yeah, Wade's gonna have a baby soon, so give it like a month of crying. He's like, Alaska sounds real cool.
Yeah, week 1, we're gonna be talking.
10 days away is a lot, but 20 days off in a row that's a lot too.
Yeah, it's a winning.
That
yeah.
sounds great. Right on. Well, thanks for watching. Hit subscribe. Thumbs us up. If you have any fun things you want us to talk about, any weird different call types, let us know, and we will see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.